They laughed at her jacket, called it old, ragged, worthless. But the moment a decorated general laid eyes on the patch stitched into its sleeve, he froze. What he said next silenced the entire room and revealed a secret no one was ready for. This isn't just a story about a jacket. It's about legacy, sacrifice, and the daughter of a forgotten hero. Stay with me. What is she even wearing? The voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to draw attention. A few snickers followed. In a brightly lit, spotless hallway of Westgate Military Academy, cadets stood in fresh uniforms, boots polished to a mirror shine, haircuts neat and tight. Everyone looked like they belonged on a recruitment poster, except one. Lena Carter stood alone near the back wall, eyes calm but alert. She wore a jacket that was clearly decades old, olive green, a little too large for her frame, with faded seams and fraying cuffs. One shoulder had a strange patch, roughly stitched, sun-faded, and barely legible. A group of recruits glanced at her, clearly amused. One of them, a tall guy with a buzz cut and too much cologne, elbowed his friend. Seriously, is that vintage military cosplay or something? She looks like she walked out of a documentary. Probably came here to drop off lunch, someone joked. They laughed again, not bothering to lower their voices. Lena said nothing. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. She just adjusted her grip on the strap of her canvas bag and kept staring ahead at the academy's crest hanging proudly above the main entrance. What the others didn't know, what none of them cared to ask, was that Lena had dreamed of being at Westgate her entire life. Not for the prestige, not for the power, but because her mother once told her, if you want to change the world, start where the world changes people. And Westgate was exactly that. A place that turned recruits into leaders. A place where generations of warriors have been forged through sweat, discipline, and honor. But looking around at her so-called peers, Lena began to wonder. Had they forgotten what honor even looked like? She was different, and she knew it. She didn't have the newest tactical gear or the funds for elite prep courses. She hadn't come from a military family. Well, not in the way the academy would recognize. Her mother, Major Evelyn Carter, had been erased from every military record after her final covert mission. Not by scandal, but by secrecy. She had lived in the shadows and died there too. The jacket Lena wore wasn't just an old piece of fabric. It was a living story. Every thread had seen mud, sweat, fire, and blood. The patch stitched into the sleeve wasn't some decoration. It was the last symbol her mother had worn, a silent badge of sacrifice. But to everyone else here, it looked like trash. A young woman with tightly braided hair whispered, "She's got to be in the wrong place. There's no way she's one of us. Did she even get accepted?" Lena heard it. She heard all of it. Still, she stayed quiet. Still, she stood tall. Because her mother once told her, real strength doesn't speak first. It waits. And when it moves, everyone listens. The grand double doors at the end of the hallway creaked open. All eyes turned. A sharp voice rang out. "Attention!" The cadets snapped into place, their snide expressions instantly erased. A man stepped through, tall, broad-shouldered, with rows of medals pinned to his deep blue uniform. General Marcus Holden, commander of the academy, and a decorated war hero. Lena stood straighter, her heart steady. He walked slowly, examining each recruit with a critical eye. Every pair of boots, every salute, every button. But when he reached Lena, he paused. His eyes didn't lock on her face. They dropped to her shoulder, to the patch. Time froze. The whispering, the judgment, the mocking, all of it dissolved in that moment of silence. The general's face changed. His jaw tightened. His hand stopped behind his back. And then, his voice lowered, gravelly with emotion. "Where did you get that jacket?" The room went still. General Marcus Holden, a man known for his iron discipline and unshakable presence, stood frozen in place. His eyes were locked on Lena's shoulder, not on her face, not on her stance, but on the small, worn patch stitched into the sleeve of her tattered jacket. The silence spread like wildfire. Every cadet, who moments ago had been smirking or whispering behind cupped hands, now stood perfectly still, watching the highest-ranking officer in the building react like he had seen a ghost. The general slowly stepped closer, each boot fall louder than the last. He stopped just a breath away from Lena, close enough to touch the fabric. His brow furrowed, and his mouth tightened into a thin line. He stared at the patch like it was a ticking time bomb. The patch was small and faded, its original colors long lost to sun and rain. It showed a barely visible winged sword crossed through a broken chain. Most people wouldn't recognize it, but General Holden did. He had seen it before, once long ago, and he had never forgotten it. "Where did you get this jacket?" he asked, his voice suddenly lower, less commanding, more human. Lena looked up at him calmly, meeting his gaze. "It belonged to my mother," she replied. "Major Evelyn Carter. She wore it during Operation Silent Vow." The name hit the general like a punch. His lips parted slightly, and for a moment, the man who had stood unflinching through war, loss, and decades of service looked shaken. "Major Carter," he whispered, barely audible. Lena nodded, her voice steady. She was part of the Silent Vow unit. This was the last jacket she wore, the only thing they sent back. The cadets behind them shifted nervously. Most had never heard of Operation Silent Vow. It wasn't part of any textbook. It wasn't discussed in lectures or seminars. It was a ghost operation, black ops, so deeply buried that even many generals never learned its full details. But General Holden knew. He had led it, and Evelyn Carter had saved his life during it. He took a long breath, glancing back at the cadets before returning his eyes to Lena. "I knew your mother. She was a legend, not just in skill, but in heart. She was one of the most selfless soldiers I ever served with. There's a reason her story isn't public. What she did can't be told, but it saved lives. Many lives." Lena remained silent. She didn't need to say anything. "I saw her for the last time in the Valley of Garin, 6 days before we were ambushed. She insisted on leading the decoy unit so the rest of us could extract. We tried to stop her." The general's voice cracked. She smiled and said, "Someone has to walk into the fire so others can walk out." He paused, his hand hovering just above the patch but not touching it like it was sacred. "I've never seen anyone wear that symbol again. Not until now. Because that patch was never issued. It wasn't standard. It wasn't even official. It was made by the team themselves, stitched by hand in silence, as a promise. That anyone who wore it was willing to sacrifice everything for the mission. It's not just a badge, cadet, it's a vow." The entire hallway was still. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the ones who had mocked her earlier were now wide-eyed, realizing that Lena wasn't just anyone. She was the daughter of a soldier who had walked through hell for others, and she wore the memory on her shoulder like armor. "Major Carter never came back," Lena said quietly. "She gave everything. And this jacket, this patch, it's what's left of her." The general straightened, his voice now firm again, filled with something more powerful than authority, respect. "She didn't just leave you this jacket. She left you her courage. And I see it now, right here, in front of all of them." He turned to the rest of the cadets. "You want to know what leadership looks like? What sacrifice looks like? It doesn't shine. It doesn't brag. Sometimes it walks in with an old jacket and stands quietly while others laugh. But real leaders don't need to shout. They let their legacy speak." Then, in front of every recruit in the building, General Marcus Holden raised his hand and saluted Lena Carter. And she, with no hesitation, returned the salute, firm and proud. As the general lowered his salute, the silence in the room remained unbroken. For a moment, time itself felt suspended. Every cadet stood stunned, watching a decorated war hero honor a young woman whose jacket they had just mocked. Then, slowly, General Holden turned to face the crowd. "You all think this place is about how sharp your uniforms are, how perfect your boots look, or how tough you can talk," he said, voice low but sharp as steel. "But Westgate is about legacy. It's about sacrifice. It's about people who walk through fire so others don't have to. And no one embodied that better than Major Evelyn Carter." He stepped back toward Lena and gestured to the patch. "You don't know what this is, do you? Let me tell you. That patch isn't just fabric, it's history." Now every eye in the room was glued to him. "Years ago," he began, "long before half of you were even in school, there was a mission, classified, black ops, no records, no medals, no backup. Just 6 people dropped into enemy territory to dismantle a rogue bioweapons program before it went global. We called it Operation Silent Vow. Gasps broke out among a few who recognized the name. You've probably only heard whispers. That's because most of the team didn't come back. But if it hadn't gone in, the fallout would have wiped out cities. That team operated under total secrecy. No uniforms, no comms, just courage. And one of them, your mother, was the reason I'm even standing here today. He turned to Lena again, his voice softer now. She was the youngest in the group, quiet but sharp, always thinking 10 steps ahead. I remember one night, before we moved on a target, I told her she could sit the mission out. She had a broken rib and a bullet wound in her arm. You know what she said? Lena shook her head gently. She said, "I didn't come here to be remembered. I came here so others could be." A lump formed in the general's throat, but he pushed through it. On the final day of the operation, the enemy had found us. We were surrounded. No way out. Evelyn volunteered to lead a diversion team. Just her and one other soldier. She drew the fire, led the enemy away, and gave us the window we needed to escape. He paused. She never returned. We searched for weeks. Eventually, we found only the jacket. Bloodstained. Torn. But that patch, he looked at it again, his voice trembling, was still intact. Lena swallowed hard, but didn't let the tears fall. She had heard bits of the story before. Pieces, fragments from people who had whispered about her mother in hushed tones. But to hear it here from the man who had served beside her, who had survived because of her, was something else entirely. The general stepped back, addressing the cadets again. Most of you are here to make a name for yourselves. But this young woman, he nodded toward Lena, walked in with a name already etched in history. A name that none of you even recognized. That's the tragedy. We forget the quiet heroes. The ones who don't ask for recognition, but deserve it more than anyone. There was a visible shift in the crowd. Shoulders dropped. Faces softened. The weight of the moment was starting to sink in. She's not wearing a rag, the general continued. She's wearing a battlefield. She's wearing her mother's strength. That jacket, it saw more courage in 1 week than some soldiers show in a lifetime. Then he looked at Lena, this time not as a commander, but as a man who had lost a comrade, and perhaps a friend. You don't have to prove anything to anyone here. But if you choose to stay, if you walk the path your mother started, I have no doubt you'll write your own chapter. One just as honorable. Lena nodded slowly, her voice soft but unshaken. I'm not here to follow her footsteps. I'm here to honor them and walk my own. For the first time since she'd entered the building, Lena wasn't alone. She was seen, not just as the girl with the old jacket, but as the daughter of a legend and a force of her own. And from that moment on, the whispers stopped, not out of fear, but out of deep, earned respect. After General Holden's powerful tribute to Major Evelyn Carter, the atmosphere inside the academy hallway was unrecognizable. Moments ago, it had been full of smug looks, whispered jokes, and judgmental glances. Now, it was silent, heavy with reflection and thick with shame. The very cadets who had laughed at Lena's jacket stood still, many of them now avoiding her eyes. A few shifted their weight awkwardly. Some looked down at the floor, guilt painted across their faces. The kind of guilt that comes when you realize you've judged someone without knowing their story. Lena soldiers I ever served with. She still stood in the same spot, isn't public. Jacket draped can't be over her shoulders, but it saved lives. But now, many lives. The room no longer remained at her like she didn't belong. She didn't need to say anything. One of the cadets, Jordan, I saw her for the last time, the same one who had made the thrift store joke 6 days before we were ambushed. His face had lost. She insisted on leading the decoy unit. I didn't know. The rest of us, he said quietly. We tried to stop her. I was wrong. The general's voice cracked. He looked directly at her. She smiled. Not as a competitor. Someone has to walk into the fire, but as someone trying to make it right. I'm sorry. Lena didn't answer right away. Just above the patch, she looked around the room, touching it, at the sea of young faces. I've never seen anyone wear that symbol had already written her off before they even knew her. Because that patch she could have lashed out. She had every right to. But her mother had always told her it was made by the grace in the face of ignorance, stitched by hand and silence. Most people will never understand that anyone who she chose her words willing to sacrifice. You didn't have to know who I was, It's
Lena
not just a
said calmly.
badge, cadet.
You didn't
It's
need
a
to
vow.
recognize the patch.
The entire hallway
Respect
was
shouldn't
still.
depend on someone's
You could have heard a
past.
pin drop.
It should be
Even
your
the
default.
ones who had mocked her
Until
earlier
someone
were now
proves
wide-eyed,
they don't deserve
realizing that
the words
Lena
hit
wasn't
like
just
a weight
anyone.
across the room.
She was the daughter of a
continued,
soldier who had
her voice
walked
stronger
through
now.
hell for others.
You don't earn your place here
and she
with
wore the
perfect
memory
boots
on her
or
shoulder
new
like
gear.
armor.
You earn it
Major
with
Carter
heart,
never came
with
back.
grit, and
Lena
by
said
never
quietly.
underestimating the people
She gave
around you.
everything.
There was no
in this
anger
jacket,
in her
this
tone.
patch,
Just
it's
clarity.
what's left of her.
Just truth.
The General Holden, his voice
who had remained
now
respectfully
firm
silent,
filled
during
with
her
something
words,
more powerful
finally
than
stepped
authority.
forward again.
Respect. That
She didn't
he
just
said,
leave you this
is the
jacket.
voice of a leader.
She left you her
He
courage.
turned to the rest of the
and
cadets.
I see it now.
Many
Right
of you will
here,
spend the next
in front
4
of all of
years
them.
here
He
trying
turned
to
to
be
the
the
rest
best.
of the cadets.
But take a moment.
You want to know
and
what
ask
leadership looks
yourselves,
like?
What
What
does
sacrifice
best
looks
really
like? Does it mean
It doesn't
loudest?
shine.
It doesn't
fastest.
brag. The one
Sometimes
with the most
it
medals?
walks in with an
Or
old
does
jacket
it mean the
and
one who
stands
stands
quietly
alone
while others laugh,
unshaken?
But real
while
leaders
others
don't
don't
need
need
to
to
shout,
shout,
and
they
never
let
let
their
their
legacies
legacies
speak.
speak. Then,
He paused,
in front
letting
of
the
every
lessons sink
recruit
in.
in the building,
You want to wear this
General
uniform?
Marcus
You
Holden
want to command
raised his
soldiers?
hand and
Then learn
saluted
this
Lena
now.
Carter.
Character
And she,
matters more
with
than
no
rank.
hesitation,
And strength
returned the
doesn't
salute.
always shout. Firm
Sometimes
and
it
proud.
walks quietly
As the general
into a room,
lowered his salute,
wearing a jacket
the silence
no
in the
one
room
understands,
remained
until the
unbroken.
truth makes them
For a
all
moment,
listen.
Time
The hallway
itself
remained
felt
suspended.
A few
Every
of the younger
cadet
cadets
stood stunned,
looked like they might
watching
cry.
a decorated
Others
war
stood a
hero
little
honor
straighter,
a young woman,
not out of
whose
fear,
jacket
but
they
out of
had just
admiration.
mocked.
Another
Then,
recruit,
slowly,
a girl named
General
Mia
Holden
Torres,
turned to face the
stepped
crowd.
forward next.
You all think this
You
place
don't have to
is
forgive
about
us,
how sharp your
but I
uniforms
want you to know
are, how
I
perfect
see
your
now.
boots look.
We all do.
or how
Lena
tough you
gave
can
her a
talk.
small,
He said,
grateful
voice
nod.
low, but
I'm
sharp
not
as
here to be
steel.
seen, but
She
Westgate
replied,
is about
I'm here to
legacy.
serve.
It's about
Just like my mother.
sacrifice.
There was a long
It's about
pause
people who
before the
walk
general
through
finally
fire
said,
so others
well,
don't have to.
Cadet Carter.
And no one
I
embodied
hope the
that
others
better
follow
than
your
Major
lead.
Evelyn
Then,
Carter.
with quiet
He stepped back
dignity,
toward Lena,
he stepped aside and
gestured
motioned
to
for the
patch.
group to
You
begin
don't know what this
moving
is, do
into
you?
the orientation
Let me tell
hall.
you. But
That
as the
patch
cadets
isn't
filed
just
past
fabric,
Lena,
it's history.
something had changed.
Now every
Some
eye in
offered
the
a small
room
nod.
was glued to
Others
him.
saluted her
Years ago,
without being
he
told.
began,
And not a
long
single
before
one
half of
laughed.
you were even in school.
Because in just
It
a
was
few
mission,
minutes,
classified,
everything had shifted.
black ops.
The girl
no
in the old
records,
jacket,
no medals,
had become
no
the one
backup.
everyone
Just 6
respected.
people dropped
And it
into
wasn't
enemy
because of the
territory
patch
to
or the
dismantle
story
a rogue
or even a
bioweapons
mother's legacy.
program.
It was
before
because
it
when
went global.
tested, we
She
called it
stood her
Operation
ground with
Silent
humility,
Vow.
strength,
Gasps broke out
and
among
wisdom
a few who
far
recognized
beyond
the
her
name.
age.
You've probably
That was
only
something
heard
even
whispers.
Westgate couldn't
That's because
teach.
most of the
Weeks
team didn't
passed,
come back.
and the story of
But if
that
they hadn't
day,
gone in, the
when a young
fallout
woman
would
in a
have
worn-out
cities.
jacket silenced
That
a
team
room
operated
full
under
of future
total
officers,
secrecy,
spread
no
through the halls
uniforms,
of Westgate
no
Military
comms,
Academy
just courage.
like wildfire.
And one of them, Lena
Your
Carter,
mother,
quickly
was the
became a
reason
name
I'm even
people
standing
didn't
here today.
forget. He
Not
turned to Lena
because
again,
she demanded
his voice
attention.
softer now. Not because she
She
was the
showed
youngest
off,
in the group,
but because she had
quiet but
already
sharp.
earned something
Always
far
thinking
rarer in
10
a place
steps
built
ahead.
on
I
discipline
remember one
and
night,
hierarchy.
before we moved on a target,
authentic respect.
I told her she
Her
could sit
jacket,
the mission out.
once
She
the
had a
source
broken
of
rib
mockery,
and a bullet
was
wound in
now
her arm.
viewed like a
You know what she
sacred
said?
relic.
Lena,
The same
shook her
cadets
head
who had ridiculed
She
it in
said,
whispers
I
now
didn't come
spoke of
here
it
to be
in
remembered.
hushed
I came
admiration.
here
So
new
others
recruits
could
came
be.
in,
A lump
already
formed in the
aware
general's
of the
throat,
girl with the patch,
but he pushed through.
the daughter of a
On
legend.
the final day of the
and a
operation,
rising leader,
the
in
enemy
her
had
own right.
found us.
But Lena
we were
didn't
surrounded.
change
because
no way
of
out.
the recognition.
Evelyn volunteered
If
to lead a
anything,
diversion team.
she became more focused,
Just her,
and
more
one other
driven.
soldier.
While others
She drew the
competed
fire,
for praise,
led the enemy
she
away,
remained grounded,
and gave us
every
the
morning.
window we needed
She woke
to
before
escape.
dawn.
He paused,
laced her boots.
She never
without
returned.
complaint. We
and
searched
trained
for weeks.
harder than anyone else.
Eventually,
We
not to
found
impress,
only the jacket,
to honor, bloodstained.
She didn't want to live in her
torn,
mother's shadow.
but that patch.
She wanted
He
to
looked at it
build her
again,
own
his
legacy,
voice trembling,
brick by
was still
brick,
intact.
step by step.
Lena swallowed
And day by
hard,
day she
but
did.
didn't let the
Her
tears
instructors
fall.
noticed.
She had heard
not just
bits
in her
of the story
performance,
before, but in how
pieces,
she treated others.
fragments from people
when
who
one
had
cadet
whispered about
injured her
mother
ankle
in
during a
hushed
drill.
tones.
But
Lena
to hear it
carried
here
her
from
on
a
her
man
back
who had
across the
served
training
beside
field
her,
without
who
being
had
told.
survived because
When another
of her,
broke down
was
during
something
a
else
tactical
entirely.
exercise. The general wasn't cut out for the military. Addressing the cadets, Lena sat with him. Most of you are here to make reminding him why he started. But this young woman seeking her out for advice, not just about the name already, but about mindset. When one girl admitted none of you even thinking of quitting, Lena simply asked, "We forget the quiet of failing, or the ones who don't ask for recognition meant to be, but deserve it more than anyone." They always did. There was a visible shift because Lena didn't just speak from books. Shoulders dropped. She spoke from experience. Faces softened. By the weight of her first year, was starting to she was already being considered. She's not wearing a rag. Leadership role. The general continued. Not just because of her skills, wearing a battlefield, but because people she's wearing her mother's without being asked. That jacket, there was something in the way she carried herself 1 week than in the calm in her voice, showing a lifetime, and the weight behind. Then he looked at Lena, and always this time that jacket as a commander. It grew as a man who had worn over time, but Lena never replaced it. You don't have to prove anything mended where needed. but she
But if you
never
choose
covered
to
the
stay,
patch.
if
you
you
walk
walk
the
the path
path
your mother
promise,
started,
and it
I
reminded
have
her
no
every
doubt you'll
day
write your
why
own
she
chapter.
came. At graduation,
This is honorable.
3 years later,
Lena nodded slowly.
Lena Carter stood
Her
at the front of
voice
her class,
soft,
but
top of her
unshaken.
unit. I'm
Commended
not here to
for
follow
her
her
leadership,
footsteps.
bravery,
I'm here to
and
honor
integrity.
them and walk
General
my own.
Holden,
For the first
now
time since
retiring,
she'd entered the
returned to
building,
present the
Lena
final
wasn't
award.
alone.
But before
She
he
was
handed her the
seen.
medal, not
He
just as
paused.
the girl with the
I've
old
given out
jacket,
hundreds of
but
awards
as
in
the
my
daughter
career,
of a
he
legend.
said.
But
And
this
the
one
force
means
of her
more
own.
to me.
And from
than
that
all
moment
the
on,
rest.
the whispers
because I've had the
stopped.
honor of
Not out of
watching
fear,
someone
but out of
turn
deep,
quiet
earned
courage
respect.
into daily action.
After General
Someone who
Holden's
didn't just
powerful
follow a
tribute
legacy,
to Major
she
Evelyn
elevated
Carter.
it. The
He turned to
atmosphere
Lena
inside the
and
academy
added,
hallway
"Your mother
was
would be proud."
unrecognizable.
But today,
moments ago,
I'm not saluting her
it had been
memory.
full of smug
I'm
looks,
saluting you.
whispered
He raised his
jokes,
hand
and
once more
judgmental
in a sharp
glances.
salute. Now,
And Lena,
it was silent,
standing the same jacket,
heavy with
returned
reflection,
it,
and
the
thick with
entire
shame.
auditorium,
The very cadets
rose
who had
to its
laughed at
feet
Lena's
in a
jacket
standing
stood
ovation.
still.
After the
Many
ceremony,
of them now
a
avoiding
young
her
cadet
eyes.
approached
A few
her,
shifted their
nervous,
weight
awkwardly.
Some
"Ma'am,"
looked down at the
he
floor.
said, guilt
was
painted
wondering,
across their faces.
"Do you think I could ever be like
the kind
you?"
of guilt that
Lena
comes when you
smiled
realize
gently
you've judged
and rested a
someone
hand
without
on a
knowing
shoulder.
their story?
"Don't try to be like me," she said. "Try to be better, and never let anyone else tell you what that looks like." That's what made Lena Carter a legend. Not the name, not the jacket, but the way she carried the weight of history, not as a burden, but as a torch. And in doing so, she lit the way for everyone who followed. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think twice about judging others, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We post powerful, real-life inspired stories just like this one every week. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss what matters. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and always look beyond the surface.